Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of the Suited Shootist. There's a slightly different setting this week. I'm not going into too much detail yet, but suffice to say, you may be seeing and hearing me elsewhere in the internet in the not too distant future. So stay tuned, that could be fun. But that's not what we're talking about this week. This week, what I wanted to talk about was, you hear me talk a lot about the social considerations of the armed lifestyle and all this other stuff. I wanted to talk about living with guns. Because living with guns is different than carrying guns. They're, similar. There's overlapping components to it, but they're different concepts. And here's why. Carrying a gun, that is the preparation for the event that might call for it. That is the emergency response. Living with guns is exactly that. It's going about the rest of your life while still accommodating a firearm. There is a lot of that can either dictate gear, dictate carry method, and a lot of those factors, because there are things that we do in life and there are people with whom we may interact that might shift the priorities. I'm going to use myself as the example here because, it's the only experience I can really intellectually speak to with any level of confidence. So like, for example, anniversary trip, my wife and I went to Chicago for a week. I couldn't bring a gun. And so what was I going to do? Say, no, sorry, toots, let's pick somewhere where I can carry? I could have. I don't necessarily know that would have been in the spirit of, celebrating our relationship. We had a great time. Nothing bad happened. There was a very good friend of mine from high school who got married up in New York. Again, couldn't bring a gun. So what was I going to say? Too bad, so sad. Sorry, bro. Hey, congratulations, but I ain't going. And, those are two instances where I couldn't bring a gun at all. But there are also plenty of circumstances where either bringing a firearm at all or carrying my optimal setup of a Glock 19 and a red dot may not necessarily be appropriate or in the spirit of the events in which I'm partaking. For example, we have some family friends who routinely will get together for like family dinners and stuff like that around various holidays, Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas, yada, 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 yada. And they're certainly not opposed to firearms by any stretch of the imagination. To the best of my knowledge and understanding, I'm the only one in that circle that carries on a regular basis. And, as such, if I'm going to go into somebody else's home and, celebrate whatever life event or, just share the experience of human connection. And yet I'm overtly armed or, not sufficiently discreetly armed, kind of going back to that whole discussion as to how much printing matters, because I refuse to say that it doesn't. It's just a matter of to what degree. Yeah, I could roll in either baggy clothes that make it easier to hide a big gun, but at that point I don't feel appropriately presentable to for that type of social environment. Or I could not care what people think and kind of wag it in their face, which is quite frankly just discourteous. Or I can adjust my equipment so that I still have some capabilities. Those are circumstances where I'm going to carry my little LCR 22 deep carried, or my SIG 365, stuff like that. Because the idea is, I personally choose to not make the pistol the focal point of my life. I live my life and I incorporate the appropriate defensive tools into that. I'm not going to let a gun tell me where I can and can't go. I'm not going to have the presence of a firearm potentially damage, compromise, or complicate otherwise meaningful relationships to me, because either the other individual is uncomfortable with guns or doesn't, from their worldview, see the same need for being perpetually armed as some of us do. And also, there's just places that life takes us that sometimes the optimum configuration is not situationally appropriate. And it's striking that balance. And I think that there just needs to be more emphasis with actually living with guns, because the reality is we live with guns way more than we actually shoot them in any capacity. Not to say that being the focus of a violent assault is unlikely, because again, based on the numbers that Tom Givens runs, the average adult in the U.S. has, I think, a 1 in 4 chance in their lifetime of winning that particular lottery. And so it's not low probability and it's not low stakes, but in the same vein, it is a once in a lifetime, normally, type of event. And so, just to make the math super, super easy, if you are fortunate enough to live to 100, and there's 365 days in a year, that's what, 35,000 and change days total. So are you going to live that 35,000 days in the preparation for one, like a literal fractional percent of one? So it's important to understand what your goals are, because I'm not telling people to carry small guns. I'm not telling people to carry big guns. I'm not telling people to carry at all. My point is that there needs to be less staunch dogma around being armed, because it creates this artificial cover charge of you must be at least this committed, otherwise don't bother riding the ride, go home and come back when you take this shit seriously. And that does a disservice to a lot of the people on the entry level who arguably are the ones that might need these things the most. And if you are telling somebody that has 30, 40, 50, 60 years of life experience, and it's at this point that they are starting to change their perspective, you can teach an old dog new tricks, but it takes a while. And demanding these sort of immediate hardline shifts in thinking or behavior isn't realistic. So the point of this is, while there is generally going to be an optimal set of equipment and an optimal set of behaviors, that's not always practically applicable. And it's worth talking about what those compromises are, not from a standpoint of accepting mediocrity, but so that people are equipped with the information to actually make the cost-benefit analysis that suits them properly. So when it comes to living with guns, we have to recognize, we have to acknowledge, and we have to talk about the fact that that looks very different for different people. And rule one of a gunfight is have a gun. If that is a Jennings 25 auto, it's definitely not ideal. It beats a sharp stick in the eye, and as long as somebody understands what the limitations of their equipment are and what their own personal limitations are, they are at least in a better position to not get in over their head. So I do think that living with guns is pretty critical, both in terms of the gear that you select, how you carry it, how you incorporate it into your wardrobe, etc. And good enough has become a very dirty phrase, within the training space. I think we need to embrace it a little bit more, recognize where it's valid, and recognize for whom it's valid. So I want to hear your thoughts about this down in the comments. Otherwise, hope everybody has a fantastic week. Stay dangerous and stay sharp.